The moment she said it, the words sliced through me sharper than any scalpel I had ever held. "You are only a nurse, Emily. My son deserves better." Her voice echoed through the sterile hallway of St. Alden Medical Center, cold and cutting, as if compassion had no place within her designer heels and polished tone. I stood frozen, my badge glinting under the fluorescent light, while her arrogance spread like perfume, sweet, strong, and suffocating. I had spent my life serving others, holding trembling hands, whispering hope into sterile rooms. But that day, she made me feel invisible, small, undeserving of dignity. What she did not know was that fate had already chosen me for something far greater than her approval, something that would bind our lives in a way no pride could undo. And when the truth surfaced, her words would come back to haunt her. If stories of poetic justice, healing, and human dignity move your heart, then subscribe to Emergency Fables, where every heartbeat tells a story worth feeling. My name is Emily Warren, and for the past 8 years, I have worked as a registered nurse at St. Alden Medical Center, a large hospital nestled in the heart of Seattle. It is a place where hope and heartbreak often share the same hallway, where miracles and losses coexist beneath the same white ceilings. I have always believed that nursing is not just a profession, it is a calling. From the moment I first walked into those hospital corridors, wearing my crisp white uniform and carrying more dreams than confidence, I knew this was where I belonged. Each morning, I arrive at the hospital just before sunrise. The world outside is quiet, still half asleep, while inside the emergency department, life pulses in waves of urgency. I breathe in the faint scent of antiseptic and coffee, a combination that somehow feels like home now. My coworkers often tease that I have a sixth sense for patients in distress. I always seem to know when someone needs a hand or a comforting word before they even ask. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. My mother taught me the value of kindness, humility, and service. She used to say, "Emily, never measure your worth by your title, but by the hearts you heal." Those words became the compass that guided my every choice. I never cared about wealth or status. I cared about being useful, about easing pain and offering dignity to those who felt forgotten. At St. Alden, I had built a reputation as one of the most dependable nurses on staff. Dr. Patel, the head of cardiology, often said that if he were ever on the operating table, he would trust me to monitor his vitals. My colleagues respected me, patients trusted me, and I took pride in knowing that I made a difference, however small, in the rhythm of human suffering and recovery. My days were long, often stretching into 12-hour shifts, but there was comfort in routine. The beeping monitors, the whispered prayers of families, the gentle hum of ventilators, they all formed the strange symphony of hospital life. I had learned to find peace in chaos, to smile through exhaustion, and to find joy in the moments when a patient took their first pain-free breath or walked again after weeks in bed. I lived alone in a small apartment near the hospital. It was modest but filled with little things that made it feel warm. A potted plant by the window, my mother's old armchair, and a collection of worn-out medical books. On weekends, I volunteered at a community shelter, offering basic health checkups for those who could not afford hospital care. Life was simple but meaningful. I did not crave more. Until Isabella Hartwell walked into my life. Isabella was the kind of woman who drew attention wherever she went. Elegant, poised, and impeccably dressed, she seemed to belong to a world far removed from ours. Her husband, Richard Hartwell, was a renowned architect, and together, they were one of Seattle's most influential couples. I met her for the first time when her 8-year-old son, Ethan, was admitted to our pediatric unit with a rare blood disorder. I had been assigned as the primary nurse overseeing his treatment. Ethan was a bright, gentle boy with eyes that mirrored his mother's green, but carried none of her vanity. Despite his illness, he was endlessly curious and polite. I remember the first time I adjusted his IV line. He whispered, "Thank you, Nurse Emily," with a sincerity that melted my heart. I knew immediately that I would do everything in my power to make his hospital stay as comfortable as possible. Over the weeks that followed, Ethan's condition fluctuated, his blood counts dropped unpredictably, and he needed frequent transfusions. The doctors discussed the possibility of a bone marrow transplant as his best chance for recovery. It was a difficult time filled with uncertainty and fear. During those days, I spent more time by Ethan's bedside than anywhere else. I read to him from his favorite adventure books, helped him with small art projects, and stayed with him through nights when the pain made him restless. To him, I was not just a nurse, I was a friend. Isabella, on the other hand, was difficult to please. She often scrutinized every detail, from the food trays to the bedding. She demanded constant updates, questioned medical decisions, and treated the nursing staff as though we existed to serve her whims. There was a wall of superiority around her, one built from wealth, status, and an unshakable sense of entitlement. I understood that fear makes people defensive, and that watching your child suffer can twist anyone's emotions. So I tried to remain patient. I offered her comfort where I could, reassurance when she doubted, and silence when her frustration spilled over. Most of the time, I reminded myself that empathy was part of the job. One afternoon, after another series of tests, the doctors confirmed what we had all feared. Ethan urgently needed a bone marrow transplant. Without it, his condition would worsen rapidly. The hospital began screening potential donors. Isabella and her husband were tested first, but neither matched. The search widened to extended family members, but no one compatible was found. The waiting grew heavier each day, hanging over Ethan's room like a storm cloud. Meanwhile, I continued my shifts, doing everything possible to keep Ethan comfortable. He was growing weaker, paler, but his spirit remained remarkably strong. One night, as I sat beside him, he asked me, "Nurse Emily, do you think I will get better soon?" I smiled softly and said, "Yes, Ethan. I believe miracles happen when we keep faith." Little did I know that those words would soon echo back to me in ways I could never have imagined. The following week, Isabella visited the hospital for a meeting with the transplant team. I was at the nurse's station updating patient charts when she approached. She looked immaculate as always, her blonde hair neatly styled, her perfume expensive and subtle. She glanced at me briefly before turning her attention to Dr. Patel. "Doctor," she said, her tone clipped, "we must find a match soon. Money is not a problem. Do whatever it takes." Dr. Patel explained that finding a compatible donor could take time, that money could not influence biology. But Isabella waved off his words with a dismissive gesture. There must be someone healthy, responsible, someone suitable. Her eyes landed on me for a fleeting second, and I gave her a polite nod. That was when Dr. Patel mentioned that some of the hospital staff had volunteered for screening, including myself. I had done it without a second thought. I had seen too many children lose their fight, and if there was even a small chance that I could help Ethan, I was willing. A week later, the results arrived. I was sitting in the staff lounge during my break when Dr. Patel came in with a quiet but urgent expression. He asked me to step into his office. My heart raced as I followed him. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but warm, "you are a perfect donor match for Ethan Hartwell." For a moment, the world stilled. I stared at him, unable to process the magnitude of those words. I was the match, the one chance that could save Ethan's life. Gratitude, fear, and awe all collided within me. I nodded slowly, feeling tears rise unbidden. "I want to proceed," I said immediately. "Please tell his parents." Dr. Patel smiled, clearly moved by my resolve. "You are a remarkable person, Emily. I will inform them right away." When I walked back to the nurse's station, my hands trembled slightly, but my heart felt light. I thought about Ethan's bright eyes, his soft smile, and how his laughter had begun to fade with each passing day. Now there was hope. I was that hope. But I never expected what would happen next. Later that afternoon, Dr. Patel told me that Isabella wanted to meet privately to discuss the donation. I agreed without hesitation. We met in the hospital's consultation room, a quiet, glass-walled space overlooking the courtyard. She was already there, sitting with her legs crossed, tapping her manicured nails against the table. When I entered, she looked up and gave me a brief, icy smile. "So, you are the donor," she said, as if the words carried a distasteful flavor. "Yes, ma'am," I replied calmly. "I am ready to begin the process as soon as the medical team is prepared." Her eyes scanned me from head to toe. My simple uniform, my tired face, my plain shoes. Then she leaned forward slightly and said, I appreciate your generosity, but you must understand that this is a very sensitive matter. My son's future, our family's reputation, it all must be handled delicately. I frowned slightly, unsure where she was going with this. I understand, Mrs. Hartwell. Everything will be confidential. The hospital ensures privacy for all donors. She hesitated. Then her voice grew colder. What I mean, Miss Warren, is that I would prefer if we kept certain details quiet. I do not think it would be appropriate for others to know that my son's donor is only a nurse. The words hit me like a slap. I felt the air leave my chest. Only a nurse. For a second, I wondered if I had heard her correctly. I looked at her, stunned, as she continued. You must understand, appearances matter. I will, of course, compensate you generously for your time and sacrifice, but I do not wish for this information to become public. It would be awkward. I could barely breathe. The walls of professionalism I had built began to crack under the weight of her disdain. I wanted to tell her that I was not doing this for money, that her son's life meant more to me than her reputation ever could. But my throat tightened. All I managed to say was, Mrs. Hartwell, this is not about image. It is about saving a child's life. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her lips curving into a faint smile that was anything but kind. Of course, she said softly. Still, I trust you will respect my wishes. And with that, she stood up, gathered her purse, and walked out, leaving the faint scent of expensive perfume and humiliation behind. I remained seated, my hands trembling, my heart aching. For years, I had dedicated myself to caring for others without expecting praise. But in that moment, I felt invisible, dismissed not for who I was, but for what I was not. Only a nurse. Those words echoed through me long after she left the room. That night, as I sat by Ethan's bedside, watching him sleep, I felt a strange mix of pain and determination. He looked so fragile, so innocent, completely unaware of the bitterness that had unfolded outside his hospital door. I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and whispered softly, Do not worry, Ethan. I will not let anything stop this. You will get better. And deep down, I made a silent vow. I would give him that chance, no matter how small others thought I was. The following days moved like slow currents beneath the surface of calm water, quiet but charged with tension. On the outside, everything at St. Alden Medical Center appeared normal. Patients filled the hallways, doctors hurried between departments, and nurses like me moved in practiced rhythm, tending to the endless needs of the sick and the scared. Yet beneath that daily routine, something inside me had shifted. Isabella Hartwell's words would not leave my mind. Only a nurse. They clung to me during every shift, echoed in every empty corridor, whispered between my own thoughts. I had spent years proving my worth through compassion and competence, yet one woman's disdain had reduced me, in her eyes, to nothing more than a uniform. Still, I refused to let that bitterness taint my duty. Ethan's transplant preparation had already begun, and that meant I had to remain steady. His life depended on it. My own feelings, wounded pride, anger, humiliation, could wait. The morning of the donor pre-assessment arrived. I changed into my hospital gown and sat in the sterile examination room, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air. The attending physician, Dr. Lee, explained every detail of the procedure. He spoke with the kind of calm precision that always reassured patients. I nodded at his words, signing each consent form without hesitation. As I rolled up my sleeve for another round of blood tests, I reminded myself of why I was here. Not for recognition, not for gratitude, but for Ethan. That little boy deserved a chance to live a full, bright life, no matter what his mother thought of me. When the door opened, I expected to see Dr. Lee return. Instead, Isabella walked in. She wore a cream-colored coat that looked more like something from a fashion magazine than the cold corridors of a hospital. Her eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses, but the tilt of her chin made it clear. This visit was not about gratitude. Miss Warren, she said, removing her glasses slowly. I wanted to thank you for proceeding with this. I truly do appreciate your generosity. Her words were smooth, but her tone carried that same sharp edge of superiority. I looked at her, unsure what she wanted from me. You are welcome, Mrs. Hartwell, I replied, keeping my voice measured. Ethan deserves every chance. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. I want to make sure there are no misunderstandings. After the transplant, I would prefer if your involvement remained private. There will be a lot of media attention, and I cannot allow details to distract from Ethan's recovery. She said it so matter-of-factly, as though she were discussing an event invitation rather than a human being's sacrifice. I felt my pulse quicken. I have no intention of seeking attention, I said quietly. I am doing this because it is the right thing to do. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment, calculating, assessing, before she smiled faintly. Good. Then we understand each other. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she paused. You have a kind heart, Miss Warren. But remember, kindness does not always earn respect. And with that, she walked out. I sat there in silence long after she was gone, my stomach tightening. There was a sadness behind her cruelty that I could not fully name. Perhaps it was fear, or perhaps it was the blindness of pride. But it did not matter. The choice before me remained the same. I would give Ethan my marrow, and no amount of arrogance would change that. Days passed. My colleagues sensed something was weighing on me, but I told no one. The hospital environment thrives on composure, and I could not afford to let emotion interfere with professionalism. Yet deep down, a quiet ache lived within me. There are wounds that cannot be dressed, bruises that form not on skin but on spirit. Ethan's condition began to worsen. His once lively eyes dimmed, and he grew weaker by the day. Seeing him like that fueled my resolve. When the final preparations for the transplant began, I prayed silently every night for strength, for him and for myself. On the morning of the procedure, the surgical team gathered early. I lay on the donor bed, sterile drapes covering my body, bright lights gleaming above. I tried to steady my breathing as the anesthesiologist adjusted my IV line. Just before the sedative began to work, I caught a glimpse of Ethan being wheeled into the adjacent operating room. His small hand clutched a toy car, his face pale but calm. He looked at me through the glass and smiled faintly. That single moment anchored me. It reminded me why I was there, why every sacrifice mattered. The next thing I remember is waking up in the recovery room. My body ached deeply, a dull pain radiating from my lower back where the marrow had been extracted. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of a monitor. A nurse named Julia stood beside me, her kind eyes filled with relief. You did great, Emily, she said softly. The procedure went perfectly. Ethan is in post-op now. Tears welled in my eyes. Relief washed over me like warm sunlight after a storm. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent thank you. Over the next several days, both Ethan and I began our recoveries. He responded well to the transplant, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic. I visited him whenever I could, though Isabella rarely acknowledged me. Sometimes she pretended not to see me at all. One afternoon, as I entered Ethan's room, I found Isabella sitting beside his bed, her attention fixed on her phone. She looked up briefly when I adjusted Ethan's IV line. His temperature is stable, I said quietly. He is doing very well. She nodded curtly without meeting my eyes. Yes, the doctor said as much. I hesitated, then said softly, He is very brave. You should be proud. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her expression. Vulnerability, perhaps. Then she straightened and said, Of course, he is a Hartwell. Her pride was a fortress. No amount of compassion could breach it. Over the next few weeks, Ethan continued to improve. He began to sit up, to eat small meals, and to smile again. Every time he laughed, the sound felt like medicine to my soul. He would wave at me whenever I entered the room, his gratitude shining through the innocence of childhood. But behind that healing, an undercurrent of tension remained. Isabella made it clear to the staff that she preferred privacy. She requested that my involvement not be mentioned outside medical documentation. It was as if she wanted to erase me from the story entirely. I told myself it did not matter. What mattered was Ethan's recovery. Yet late at night, when I lay in my apartment, exhaustion wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I wondered why kindness so often went unseen. Why people like Isabella could not recognize the quiet strength that exists in service. One evening, about a month after the transplant, I returned to work after my final follow-up checkup. My steps were still cautious, but I felt stronger. The hospital hallways greeted me with their familiar hum, machines beeping, voices murmuring, life moving forward. As I passed the pediatric ward, I overheard a group of nurses talking near the window. Their voices were hushed but animated. "Did you hear?" one whispered. "The Hartwells are hosting a charity gala next week to celebrate Ethan's recovery. All the big donors will be there." My breath caught slightly. I had heard nothing about it. "They are calling it the Gift of Life Gala," another nurse added. "Apparently, Isabella wants to raise funds for the hospital's transplant program. The story will be everywhere." I felt a pang of bittersweet emotion. A gala to celebrate Ethan's survival. That was beautiful. But I also knew Isabella's need for control would likely ensure that my part in the story remained buried. A few days later, as I was finishing my shift, I received an envelope in my locker. There was no name on it, only a white card embossed with gold lettering. The Gift of Life Gala, St. Alden Medical Foundation. Inside was a formal invitation, signed by the hospital administration and the Hartwell family. My name was printed neatly on the card. For a long moment, I just stared at it, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Perhaps Isabella had not been the one to send it. Perhaps the hospital staff wanted me there. Either way, I decided to attend. On the evening of the gala, the city shimmered with lights. The event was held in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, where chandeliers sparkled like captured stars. Guests in elegant attire mingled beneath the golden glow, their laughter echoing softly through the marble hall. I arrived quietly, wearing a simple navy blue dress. I did not belong to their world of luxury, but I carried something far greater, a story that pulsed with truth. From across the room, I saw Isabella greeting guests, her smile poised and perfect. Beside her stood Richard Hartwell, tall and distinguished, with Ethan between them in a small suit. My heart swelled at the sight of the boy's radiant smile. He looked healthy, vibrant, alive. But when Isabella's gaze met mine, her expression faltered for the briefest moment. Surprise flickered, then discomfort, before she masked it with her usual composure. "Emily," said Dr. Patel warmly, approaching me. "I am so glad you came. You deserve to be here." "Thank you," I replied, grateful for his sincerity. The evening unfolded with speeches, music, and polite applause. Guests sipped champagne and exchanged polite conversations about philanthropy and hope. When Isabella took the stage to speak, the room fell silent. She spoke eloquently about gratitude, resilience, and the miracle of modern medicine. She thanked the doctors, the donors, and the medical community, but never once mentioned the name of the person whose marrow had saved her son's life. I sat quietly, my hands clasped in my lap. I should not have been surprised, but the omission still stung. To the world, I was invisible again. Yet beneath that quiet pain, something else stirred, a calm, certain strength. Truth does not need recognition to exist, and sometimes fate has its own way of revealing it. As the applause faded and the evening drew to a close, I looked toward Ethan. He caught my eye, smiled brightly, and waved. That small gesture was worth more than every speech in the room. I smiled back, unaware that soon everything would change, that truth, like light through glass, would find its way through the cracks Isabella had tried so hard to seal. The air inside the ballroom felt heavy that night, rich with perfume, candlelight, and pretense. I remember the way the chandeliers shimmered above the crowd, scattering golden reflections across champagne glasses and jeweled wrists. Everyone around me seemed wrapped in a perfect illusion, elegant laughter, polite admiration, and the faint hum of a jazz quartet playing somewhere near the stage. Yet beneath that glittering surface, I could feel a tremor building, quiet but inevitable, like thunder waiting at the edge of a summer sky. The evening speeches were drawing to a close. The charity auction had just ended, and the mood was high, indulgent, celebratory. Ethan sat at the front table between his parents, his small hands folded neatly in his lap. He looked healthier than ever, color returned to his cheeks, his energy blooming again after months of uncertainty. Every so often, he turned to wave at the doctors seated nearby, smiling brightly in a way that made my heart ache with joy. Isabella, ever composed, glowed under the soft lights. Her gown shimmered like liquid gold, her hair swept elegantly over one shoulder. To everyone else in the room, she was the image of grace and gratitude. But I saw something else behind her poise. A quiet tension, a subtle stiffness every time her eyes darted in my direction. She had not expected me to come. She certainly had not expected me to sit near the stage where truth could not be easily ignored. Dr. Patel, serving as the evening's master of ceremonies, stepped up to the microphone. His warm, reassuring voice filled the room. Tonight we celebrate not only generosity, but life itself. We honor the miracle of science, compassion, and human courage that saved young Ethan Hartwell's life. It is because of such courage that we gather here, to remember that hope still breathes within every hospital hallway, within every willing heart. The audience broke into applause, polite and admiring. I saw Isabella smile, graciously acknowledging the praise as though it belonged to her. But then Dr. Patel continued. "There is one more thing," he said, his tone shifting slightly, carrying a note of quiet reverence. "One more story behind this miracle. One that deserves to be told." The room began to still. I felt my heartbeat echo inside my chest, steady and loud. Dr. Patel looked across the audience, his eyes finding me. "Many of you know Nurse Emily Warren," he said clearly. "She has served at St. Alden Medical Center for 8 years, dedicating her life to caring for others with unmatched compassion. What few know, however, is that she is also the bone marrow donor who saved Ethan Hartwell's life." The sound of his words seemed to stretch through the air, suspended in perfect silence. Glasses froze midair. Conversations halted. Every head in the room turned toward me. For a moment, I could not move. The blood in my veins felt like static, my breath caught between disbelief and fear. I had never wanted recognition, yet now, as every pair of eyes settled upon me, I felt the weight of truth lift and descend all at once. Gasps rippled across the tables. Someone began to clap. Softly at first, then louder. The applause grew, rising like a tide. Strangers smiled. Some even stood, their faces filled with warmth and admiration. And then slowly, Isabella rose to her feet. Her expression was unreadable. Shock flickered across her eyes, chased by disbelief, and then something else, something raw and unguarded. She had not expected this revelation. Her carefully maintained facade was beginning to fracture. Dr. Patel stepped aside, motioning gently toward the microphone. "Emily," he said with quiet respect, "if you wish to say something, please do." My legs trembled as I stood, though my heart steadied with every breath. The applause faded into silence again, leaving only the hum of expectation in the air. I walked slowly toward the stage, the soft click of my heels echoing like punctuation against marble floors. When I reached the podium, I looked out at the sea of faces. Doctors, nurses, donors, and strangers. And finally, at Isabella and her son. Ethan smiled at me, unaware of the tension that rippled through the room. That smile gave me courage. "I did not expect to be standing here tonight," I began softly, my voice carrying through the microphone, calm but filled with emotion. "I am not used to attention. Most of my work happens quietly, behind curtains, in recovery rooms, during long nights when families sleep and machines keep rhythm with fragile hearts." I paused, glancing down for a moment, then looked back up. When Ethan was admitted to our hospital, I met a little boy who never once complained, even when pain made him tremble. I met a child who thanked every nurse, who smiled even when he was afraid. His courage reminded me why I chose this profession, and when I learned that I was his donor match, I did not hesitate. I simply did what I have always done. I cared. The room was silent. I could feel the emotion shifting, deepening, becoming something larger than pity or admiration. "I never sought recognition," I continued, "because true healing never asks for it. But tonight, as I stand here, I want to remind everyone of something that this experience taught me. Titles and positions may define what we do, but they do not define who we are. Dignity does not wear a uniform. Compassion does not belong to privilege. Sometimes the hands that save lives are the ones people overlook. A quiet murmur of agreement swept through the audience. I could see nurses wiping tears from their eyes. A few doctors nodded solemnly. My gaze found Isabella again. She stood frozen in place, her chin trembling ever so slightly. For the first time since I had met her, she looked small. Not in stature, but in spirit. Vulnerability broke through her polished composure. I took a slow breath, steadying the storm of emotion within me. "We all share this human thread," I said gently. "Every life has value. Every act of kindness has meaning. Ethan's survival is not just a medical success. It is a reminder that empathy can cross every boundary we create." When I stepped back from the microphone, the silence held for one fragile heartbeat, and then the room erupted into applause. It was not polite this time. It was powerful, sustained, heartfelt. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even crying. The sound filled every corner of the ballroom, wrapping around me like a wave of warmth I had never expected to feel. But amid the applause, my eyes searched for only one face: Isabella's. She stood still, motionless, her eyes glistening in the light. Her son tugged gently at her hand, whispering something that made her blink rapidly. Then, almost hesitantly, she began to clap. The sound was soft at first, then louder, until she joined the chorus of applause surrounding us. Yet her face told another story, one of realization, regret, and something close to humility. After the speeches ended, people approached me with handshakes and kind words. I smiled, thanked them, but my attention remained on the woman who had once reduced me to a title. She approached slowly, her heels clicking against the marble, her expression composed but fragile. "Miss Warren?" she said quietly, stopping just a step away from me. "I owe you an apology." Her voice trembled slightly, the words tasting unfamiliar to her tongue. I met her gaze calmly. "You owe no apology to me, Mrs. Hartwell," I replied. "Only to the truth." She looked down, her breath shuddering. "When I first met you, I saw only what I wanted to see. I was terrified of losing my son, of losing control. I clung to pride because it was easier than fear. But tonight, I saw the truth. You gave my child life, and I repaid you with arrogance. I was wrong." Her sincerity, raw and unpolished, caught me off guard. For the first time, her voice carried no sharpness, only vulnerability. I nodded slowly. "We all learn when life humbles us," I said softly. "That is what makes us human." She blinked back tears, her composure cracking once more. Then she turned to where Ethan stood beside her, holding a small bouquet of white lilies, pure and trembling in his small hands. "Mom said I should give these to you," he said shyly, looking up at me. "Because you gave me new blood, and because I want you to know I love you." My throat tightened. I knelt to his level, accepting the flowers with shaking hands. "Thank you, Ethan," I whispered, my eyes misting. "You gave me something, too. You reminded me that kindness always matters." He smiled, his small fingers brushing mine. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of everything I had endured. The humiliation, the pain, the sacrifice, and the redemption that followed. That night, as I left the ballroom, the city outside glittered under a blanket of stars. The air felt lighter, the sky clearer, as though even the universe had exhaled a long-held breath. I walked to my car slowly, the bouquet pressed gently to my chest. Behind me, the music continued, laughter spilling out through the hotel doors. But within that sound, there was a new note, a deeper understanding that had taken root in more than one heart. The next morning, as I returned to my shift at St. Alden, I felt a strange sense of peace. Life at the hospital moved on as always. Emergencies, alarms, healing, and hope. Yet when I walked through those halls, people looked at me differently. Not because I had been recognized at a gala, but because they saw something they had always known. That nurses are not secondary, they are the silent heartbeat of healing. Later that afternoon, I received a letter. It was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged, the paper thick and expensive. The return address read Hartwell Residence. I unfolded it carefully. Dear Emily, it began. There are moments when words feel too small to hold the weight of gratitude. You gave my son life. You also gave me humility. I will never forget either. With respect and sincere thanks, Isabella. I closed the letter and smiled. There was no anger left in me, only understanding. Some lessons must be lived to be learned, and she had learned hers through the quiet grace of truth. That night, as I looked out my apartment window toward the hospital skyline, I realized something profound. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the final act of strength. It is choosing peace over pride, compassion over resentment. And in that peace, I found closure. When the storm finally passed, silence became my closest companion. The hospital returned to its familiar rhythm, the steady hum of machines, the shuffle of footsteps along polished floors, and the distant murmur of families reunited with hope. Yet beneath that ordinary surface, something had changed. Not just within the walls of St. Alden Medical Center, but within me. The night after the surgery, I sat by Lucas's bedside, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest as he slept. The boy's skin, once pale and thin from illness, carried the faint blush of returning life. Every breath he took felt like a quiet thank you, even though his voice was still too weak to speak. I brushed a stray curl from his forehead, whispering a prayer, not for recognition or forgiveness, but for peace. Margaret had not come that evening. The nurses said she had been sitting in her car for hours, staring blankly at the hospital entrance, unable to gather the strength to step inside. I understood her absence. It was not hatred that kept her away. It was the heavy weight of regret. Some wounds are deeper than the body can heal, and the realization that her cruelty had almost cost her son his life was a burden only a mother could know. I did not rejoice in her pain. Instead, I felt a strange calm, the kind that follows a storm you once thought would destroy you, but instead washed you clean. For years, I had allowed other people's judgments to define my worth. I had believed that being only a nurse meant being less than others, less successful, less admired, less deserving of love. But sitting there beside a sleeping child whose heart now carried a part of me, I understood that my worth had never depended on titles or wealth. It had always been measured in compassion, courage, and the quiet acts of service that rarely receive applause. The next morning, as dawn spilled gold through the blinds, I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned to see Margaret standing at the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from tears, her once perfect hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She looked nothing like the woman who had dismissed me days earlier. She looked human, fragile, trembling, remorseful. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick with everything that could not be said. Then slowly, she stepped forward and whispered, "Emily, I am so sorry." Her voice cracked under the weight of those words. I saw the raw sincerity in her eyes, the kind that cannot be faked or forced. She reached for my hand hesitantly, as though she did not believe she deserved to touch me. I let her. Because forgiveness, I had learned, was not a gift for those who wronged us. It was a release for ourselves. It was the act of choosing peace over pride, healing over hate. "I never wanted you to suffer," she said softly. "I was blind. I thought status meant safety. I thought money could fix everything. But you saved my son, even after what I said to you. I do not know how to live with that." I shook my head. "You do not have to live with guilt, Margaret. You only have to live with truth. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after them." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "If there is ever a way I can repay you." "There is," I interrupted gently. "Raise him to be kind. Teach him that worth is not worn on the outside. That would be enough." She covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. Then she leaned forward and embraced me, a gesture so unexpected and pure that it stole my breath for a moment. In that embrace, there was no arrogance, no pride, no titles. Only two women who had faced life and loss and found something human in each other. After that day, the world seemed to soften around me. My colleagues looked at me differently, not with pity, but with quiet respect. The chief medical officer called me into his office, expressing gratitude and announcing that the hospital board had approved a scholarship fund for nurses pursuing advanced medical training, named in my honor. "The Emily Carter Compassion Grant," he said with a smile. "Because you reminded all of us what this profession truly means." The words filled me with humble pride, but they also reminded me of something deeper. How many unseen hearts walked these halls, giving more than they ever received. I promised myself that I would never forget them, that I would lift others as I had once struggled to stand tall myself. In time, Margaret and Lucas became regular faces in my life. She visited often, not out of obligation, but gratitude. We shared quiet conversations over coffee in the hospital garden. Lucas, now healthy and full of laughter, loved to draw pictures for the nurses who had cared for him. Once he handed me a crayon drawing of a woman with a shining heart, standing beside a smiling child. At the bottom, in crooked letters, he had written, "My hero, Nurse Emily." That drawing now hangs framed in my living room. Whenever I look at it, I remember that life often humbles us to reveal our truth. That dignity is not found in recognition, but in resilience. And that sometimes poetic justice does not come through revenge, it comes through grace. Months later, I received an invitation to speak at the hospital's annual charity gala. The theme was Humanity in Healthcare. The irony was not lost on me. The same event Margaret had once deemed me unworthy to attend was now asking me to share my story. As I stood at the podium under the soft glow of chandeliers, I saw her seated near the front, her hands clasped, her eyes glistening. I took a deep breath and began. "I used to think that saving lives meant using medicine," I said. "But I have learned that sometimes saving lives means using kindness. We often talk about science, skill, and precision, but we forget that compassion is the most powerful tool we have. I was once told that I was only a nurse, and for a long time I believed that made me small. But then I realized something. Being a nurse means being there when no one else is. It means giving, not because the world applauds you, but because someone needs you." The room fell into a reverent silence. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. When we measure people by their titles, we shrink the human soul. But when we see them through the lens of empathy, we expand what it means to truly live. As I stepped off the stage, the crowd rose to their feet. I caught Margaret's gaze through the applause. She smiled through her tears, mouthing the words, "Thank you." In that moment, everything came full circle. The humiliation, the rejection, the pain, it had all led here. To this quiet triumph where grace, not vengeance, became my victory. That night, as I left the ballroom, I paused outside the glass doors, watching the city lights flicker against the dark. The world felt vast, but I no longer felt small within it. I had learned to stand tall, not because others saw my worth, but because I finally did. Life moved forward in the months that followed. I returned to my work, to the quiet rhythm of healing, to the endless cycle of beginnings and endings that made up our days at St. Alden. But something in me remained unshakable now, a peace that came from knowing that even the smallest act of compassion can rewrite the story of someone's life. Sometimes I still think about that moment in the hallway when she said, "You are only a nurse." It no longer hurts. Instead, it reminds me how far I have come. Because in proving my worth, I never had to become someone else. I simply had to be who I already was. A nurse, yes, but also a human being who refused to stop caring. The world often measures success by wealth, beauty, or titles. But true success, I have learned, is found in quiet integrity. It is found in choosing kindness over pride, empathy over ego, and courage over comfort. That is the lesson I carry now. Not just as a nurse, but as a woman who once stood unseen and found her light through service. And if my story reaches anyone who feels overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed, I want them to remember this. The value of your heart will always outweigh the value of your title. Dignity is not given by others. It is built through compassion, courage, and grace in the face of injustice. If stories of poetic justice, healing, and redemption move your soul, join me on Emergency Fables, where every story reminds us that compassion is the truest form of power. Subscribe, and let your heart be part of the story.